Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to introduce one of the most powerful and unique features in Python, list comprehension. The idea of comprehension actually applies to many other data structures that we'll learn about later, things like dictionaries and sets, tuples and generators, all of which we'll see later on in the course. So understanding them, you could say comprehending them, and the syntax, the idea, is going to be really important. So basically, it's this cool shorthand syntax that allows us to generate new lists, to make new lists that are direct copies of other lists, or more often than not, are tweaked versions, where we could take one list and then generate a new one that has every number squared, or every string reversed. And they can get a lot more complex than that. So I'll just let the examples speak for themselves. But before we get there, we need to start with the syntax. So I'm going to show you the syntax, and it's going to look bizarre and look like it does nothing because it's basically a bunch of blanks, at least in this example. So we start with brackets, just like we did with slices. And there are three components. So we have this first variable name, for, and that word is always there, for, and then a second variable name that is the same as the first one, and you just bear with me for a moment, in, and then the name of another list or of a range, something that we could iterate through. So this part is kind of like for something in a list. It's a for loop. But then we have this first thing that's a bit different, and this is just impossible to talk about without looking at an example. So let's do that first. Okay, here I have a list called nums, very simple, and let's do a list comprehension of, I'm going to do x times x, or we could just, let's just do x times 10 for x in nums. So what this will do is for every x in num, so 1, 2, 3, we're going to multiply it by 10 and put it in a new list. So we end up with 10, 20, 30. So I think this makes it a bit clearer. We have blank for blank in blank. So we have a list, a placeholder variable for each item in that list, and then some way of manipulating each item in the list. So x times 10, or we could do, x divided by 2, and we get 0.5, 1.0, and 1.5. But the rough idea is we take an existing list and output another list with different values based upon the first list. And this seems like something we could do with a loop, and that's because it is. So here's an example of doing something with a for loop. So if we wanted to make a new list where we take a numbers list, and this new list has every number from the numbers list but doubled, we could loop through numbers, and for each num in there, we're going to double it, and then append it to the doubled numbered list, or doubled numbers list. So one at a time, we multiply by 2 and add it into this list. Multiply 2 by 2, we add 4 to the list. 3 by 2, we add 6 to the list. And we end up with this. But using a list comprehension, we can do it in a single line. So we have our numbers list, and then all we have to do is write list brackets, num times 2 for num in numbers. And Python takes care of the rest. It generates a new list with 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So we can do the same thing, it's just a lot more concise and definitely preferable, it's just better than this example. So it's really helpful stuff. Let's look at a couple more examples. So here we have a string, and what we're doing, remember we can do a for loop over a string for each character, and for each character in name, we're going to take that character like C and uppercase it. So upper is a string method. We saw it briefly, I think, in rock, paper, scissors. If you watched it, we also saw lower, but all it does is it takes a string and converts it to uppercase in this case. And we end up with a list where each character is an uppercase letter from this string, C-O-L-T, all uppercase. In the second example, we have a list of friends, and we're taking each string and uppercasing the first letter and getting back a new list of friends with their names capitalized. So we have friends, Ashley, Matt, and Michael. We are looping through, so for each friend in friends, take that friend, take the first character, and uppercase it. So then we end up with Ashley, capital A, Matt, capital M, Michael, capital M. And so we end up with a list always. So even though if we're working with a string, in this case, we're looping through the string, this is a list comprehension. The end result that's returned is a list. Same thing down here. This stuff can be a bit tricky, so we have a couple more examples. Feel free to pause this at any point, try things out on your own. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but it's used pretty much everywhere in Python. In a lot of the big code bases that you'll see out there, open source projects, you definitely need to be comfortable with these if you want to use Python with data science or game development, web development, all that stuff. We previously saw that we can use list comprehension to iterate over a string. We can do that with ranges as well. So here's taking a range 1, 6, generates numbers between 1 and 5, and we just multiply them by 10, and we get a list with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Pretty neat. Neat, yeah. In this next example, we're using list comprehension in a little different way. We're turning values into their Boolean representation using the bool function, which we haven't really seen, but we've seen str for string to convert to a string. We've seen int to convert to an int. Same thing. So it takes in a number, or it doesn't take in a number, it takes in a value, whatever it is, and it will return if it's truthy or falsy. So remember that things like anything like an empty string is inherently falsy. So if I convert that to a bool, we get false. But if I add a space in there or some letters, it becomes truthy. Or any number is going to be truthy except 0. So all we're doing here is taking this list, 0, an empty list, and an empty string, converting them all to bools, and we get false, false, and false. Not something you would probably do, but it's just fun to see that you can work with all sorts of data in these list comprehensions. And in this last example, we're taking a list of numbers and converting it to a list of strings. So you definitely will find yourself needing to convert one data type to another in Python. And if you need to convert a list from one type to another, list comprehension is a great way of doing that. So you don't have to loop through manually and run the string converter, string function str every single time to cast a number to a string. You can have Python take care of it for you with a list comprehension, just like this. So we have our ints, and for each num in this numbers list, we're going to turn it into a string, and our end result is the string version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. So let's try a couple of these. I think I have colors here still. So we could do something like array brackets, and let's do color dot upper for color in colors. And we end up with all caps. Or we have nums still. So we could do something like str of nums, num, for num in nums. So remember, this is totally up to us. Call this whatever we want. And now we end up with the string version of things. And we could even do something like this. str of num plus the string hello for num in nums. And we end up with 1 hello, 2 hello, 3 hello. Okay, so hopefully you can see how flexible these are. I'm going to stop here, but I'm actually going to continue talking about list comprehension in the next video, where we'll see how to use list comprehension with conditional logic built in.